Hello and welcome to Mr. Cinema. Today we will recap a science fiction action film called The World's End. Be ready for spoilers ahead. Everyone remembers where they were when the lights went out on the planet Earth, when all the technology stopped working, turning Earth back to the Dark Ages, when they realized half of the world's population had been replaced with brainless humans who could do as they are told without second thought. But no one could tell the story better than Gary King, the man who accidentally discovered aliens living among people, slowly turning them into brainless idiots. The year was 1990 in a small town of Newton Haven, and Gary King and his 4 friends had just finished high school, so to celebrate their newly found freedom, they planned what would turn out to be the best night of their lives, to conquer the Golden Mile, a legendary route with 12 pubs of total alcoholic indulgence. So they rode into town and without wasting any time, the party began. It was pub after pub, taking drink after drink without any care in the world. By pub 5, things had gotten so crazy that some of them blacked out, but in the end, they blew off the last 3 pubs and headed for the hills to watch the beautiful morning sun. And at that very moment, Gary King had a feeling that life would never feel that good again. And for sure, it never did. All this is being told by a now old Gary King, in an AA meeting of recovering alcoholics. In fact, he had ended up there trying to recreate that very night. Then right there in that small circle, it hit him. They never really got to finish the Golden Mile. And maybe that is all he needs to finally bury his obsession with that night. So Gary King got a brilliant idea, to get the crew back together and head into Newton Haven, and recreate the best night of his life. So he starts to track them down and recruit them into his mission. Peter, the once geeky little guy, is now a car salesman and a father of 2. Steve grew up to own his own construction company. Oliver, on the other hand, became a real estate agent. And lastly, Andrew, who was once Gary King's best friend, is a lawyer. And after managing to convince all of them, by lying to them that his mother had died, they all agree to meet up for a night out, a decision they are all sure they will without doubt regret. So Gary King picks them up and they head to their hometown of Newton Haven. And immediately they reach, Gary had already planned everything to the detail. They would commence their adventure at the first pub called the First Post, then on to the Old Familiar, the Famous Cock, the Cross Hands, the Good Companions, the Trusty Servant, the Two-Headed Dog, the Mermaid, the Beehive, the King's Head, the Hole in the Wall, and end their night at the last and best pub of them all called the World's End. And without wasting any time, they head out to the first pub, the First Post. But right off the bat, things do not go as expected. As when they walk inside, no one seems to recognize them, not even the bartender. This is especially peculiar as they were very good friends not that long ago, but nevertheless, their beer is poured and after finishing their first pint, they proceed to the Old Familiar, and once again, the same thing happens, as nobody seems to recall who they are, including people they were once very close to. And as they are drinking the second pint, Oliver's sister Sam is also in town and so she also shows up. But after Gary follows her into the toilet thinking she had called him to have sex, the situation becomes very awkward, forcing her to leave. In spite of this, they proceed to the third pub called the Famous Cock, and for the first time they are recognized. Unfortunately, Gary King had a lifetime ban from the pub, so they are denied service and thrown out. But when Gary sees some leftover beers on the table outside, he quickly drains them without anybody seeing. But when they get to the fourth pub, the rest of the crew are already tired, so they want to retire early and abandon Gary in his so-called quest. So Gary goes to the bathroom as the night is not going as he had planned. But as he is pissing, a teenager enters and Gary tries to engage him. But no matter how politely Gary tries to engage him, the young lad completely ignores him. Angrily, Gary stops and knocks his hat off. The teen also attacks him, knocking his head against the mirror. But when Gary body slams him to the floor, the boy's head just pop off, and blue blood starts oozing out of his neck. And when the rest of them come into the toilet, none of them can believe what they are seeing, as the headless body stands up and faces them. More of this, teens match into the washroom and immediately begin attacking them. Peter quickly crawls on the floor and hides in a nearby toilet as the rest of his friends fight. Although the teenagers are significantly stronger than them, the men easily pull off their body parts and easily crash their heads in, and before long, severed body parts are scattered all over the floor. Then it all starts making sense. The whole town had been replaced by these creatures, and that is why no one could recognize them. As they are all too drunk to drive, they decide to continue as planned, pretending they know nothing until morning. Of course, a terrible plan to most, but a brilliant plan to these drunk men. So they finish their drink and head out, walking in symmetry, pretending to be like the rest of the people. But the drunker they got, the more and more out of character they become, and the more they stand out from the rest. In the Two-Headed Dog, they come across Sam accompanied by 2 blanks, so Gary pulls her into the toilet to explain what is happening. That the whole town had been taken over by robots full of blue blood, and considering Gary is not the most trustworthy person, she does not believe a word he is saying. As she is outside smoking a cigarette with her 2 friends, Gary charges and knocks them to the ground. He then chokes one of them and pulls out her head and smashes it on the ground. The other attack him and the 2 gang up on him, almost overpowering him, but he throws them against the fence. But before they get a chance to escape, one of the robots appears and begins attacking them. But Steve comes and they manage to hold it down and remove its head. So they quickly leave and head towards the 8th pub called the Mermaid, and are very surprised to see it had been converted to a nightclub, full of these robots all dancing in unison. 3 underage-looking girls wearing school uniforms start dancing while approaching the boys, and this proves to be too hard to resist, as they totally forget themselves and fully give themselves to the girls. Steve is pulled from the club by old man Basil, who is willing to tell him the truth. It turns out, aliens arrived on the planet in form of a shooting star. Then slowly by slowly, people started to change. The aliens first replaced people of influence, trying to peacefully seduce the others into joining them willingly. They usually get people's DNA through their body fluids like sweat and saliva, through kissing and other forms of intimacy. He is warned as the blanks look exactly like humans and are also given selective memory. Old man Basil then quickly disappears and tells Steve to help his friends before it is too late. So Steve quickly goes and pulls his friends away from the blanks, and they all leave the Mermaid. Although they are too drunk to notice, Oliver starts acting funny as if he had been replaced. He becomes more energetic than usual and is also very sober for a man who had taken 8 pints of beer. all except for Andrew, who notices this strange behavior. So when they sit down in the beehive, Andrew takes an empty bottle and smacks him on the head, and to everyone's surprise, his head splits in half and his head is completely empty. At this point, all the blanks stand up with their mouths and eyes glowing and declare they will forcefully replace them. But Andrew had had enough of them. He takes 2 bar stools, and when they attack, he fights back, smashing and knocking their heads off, and it quickly turns into a full-blown war. Even Oliver joins in, trying to subdue them, but he is knocked away by Gary. But the more they beat and decapitate the blanks, the more the blanks regenerate and attack again, forcing Gary to take Sam's hand and lead her upstairs trying to escape. They meet 2 more, but they easily deal with them and escape through the window. Gary stupidly jumps over the edge and lands on her car, almost completely damaging it. He puts her inside the car and tells her to leave town before things get even worse, and as she drives off, more blanks appear from every direction, forcing him to run through the fields heading to the King's Head, where he finds his 3 friends waiting for him. And due to the earlier incident with their friend Oliver, none of them trust each other, so they force everyone to show something to prove they are still human. Steve shows his backside where Gary had stabbed him with a broken bottle when they were still teenagers. Then Peter shows a scar from when a drunk Gary had run him over with a car. And for Andrew, he shows his crooked finger from when they were playing the knife game and a drunk Gary stabbed him, proving he is also human. But when Gary's turn comes, he repeatedly hits his head against the wall without his head popping off, proving he was still human and still very stupid. Suddenly, they hear noises from outside as the blanks were converging towards their location, forcing them to run from the back and into the woods. But as Peter is catching his breath, his high school bully appears and distracts him, allowing the other blanks to catch up and completely surround him. And by the time his 3 friends realize it, it is already too late, as Peter had been already overpowered. Andrew and Steve had sobered enough to realize it is time to leave, and when Gary suggests they should head to the next pub in the list, an angry Andrew punches him, knocking him out, and carries him on his back as they try to navigate the robot-filled streets of Newton Haven. But when they see a gigantic robot looking for them, they are forced to enter into the nearest building, which happens to be the 10th pub on their list, the King's Head. Gary wakes up and immediately pours himself a glass. He then removes and throws them his car keys, and allows them to drive from the town using his car, which is outside. But for him, the Golden Mile was the only thing he had come close to accomplishing in his life, so he runs out determined to finish what he had started. Andrew could not leave his friend to deal with all the blanks by himself, so he also runs out of the pub chasing after him, trying to stop him. The blanks try to stop them, but they easily manage to maneuver past them, until they comes to the 10th pub, the hole in the wall. Andrew tries to fight off the blanks, but they are just too many. Luckily, Oliver drives Gary's car into the building, giving them a breathing space, but Gary was not ready to quit just yet, so he jumps through the window and heads directly towards the world's end. Andrew also jumps out and begins chasing after him. And once Gary gets inside the world's end, and holds a beer in his hand, the joy he has can be seen through his face, but Andrew knocks the beer to the ground as he could not let his friend throw away his life for alcohol. So the 2 friends start fighting. Gary manages to push him to the side and get to the pump, but when he pulls the lever, instead of beer pouring out, the whole counter starts sinking, going lower and lower until it reaches the bottom. Then a bright light projects into the sky, and for the first time, they come face to face with the alien which is trying to take over the world, called the network. It turns out, the network is responsible for the technological advancements on the planet, like phones and internet. And that is just the beginning, as the network is trying to indoctrinate Earth into their galactic community. As Earth is the least civilized in the entire galaxy, the network had come to save it from itself, and by joining the galactic community, humans would greatly benefit from this, as apart from technological advancements, they would also get a chance to retain their youth forever. In fact, the network shows Gary a clone of himself from when he was still young and happy, and this was his chance to relive his life how he always wanted. But Gary King pulls out the head of his clone, and refuses the offer, claiming that they can only be one Gary King. He explains what makes humans special is the mistakes we make. Although technology may be very important, nothing can surpass freedom. Steve also drops in, and the 3 drunk friends start challenging the network. And when they become too difficult to convince, the network just says fuck it and leaves. The blanks immediately switch off and start falling, and the entire place begins falling apart, so they quickly run outside. Luckily, Sam had come back to them, and they quickly enter into the car and drive off, trying to escape from a huge shockwave rolling behind them, engulfing everything on its path. The shockwave destroys all the technology that the network had brought, throwing Earth back to the Dark Ages. And for the blanks, they rebooted a few weeks later after the network left and rejoined society, doing whatever they used to do when they were humans. Please like and subscribe for more.